be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Issei Rias Enter Overlord. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of I4MD347H and Zaralann on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Say, don't you think Issei has been weird lately? Momonga asked, staring at the third member of their trio. Weird? Which part? The fact that he's not hanging out with us anymore or that he is studying? After class? Matsuda pointed his finger at the third member of the trio. Issei currently reading through his notebook next to an open textbook with a focus that was reserved for the leering at female bodies. The boy was going through his notes, flipping through his pages one after another, instead of leering at the girls around him with such intense focus. Some of the girls were eyeing the teenager with interest, mostly because he was studying that strong despite his infamous reputation. It wasn't even a test week, as well. Some still held suspicion for the member of the perverted trio, however, but they could not suppress their curiosity. Issei would usually laze around or speak ridiculous nonsense. So seeing this serious side to him was a surprise, refreshing for most, baffling for two. After the estranged member reached the last page, he closed his notebook and began to pack up, about to leave the class without giving the perverted duo a greeting. He did not even throw a passing glance at Miriama and Kates with such a rushed hurry that they grew enamored with his sudden shift of behavior despite them being so close to him. Kates reached out. Is everything okay? Kates, don't speak to him. He might say something dirty and ask to peek at your panties. Miriama chastised. Why would I do that? Who in the right mind would ask a girl for something so dumb? Issei asked, turning to them with a quirked brow. Miriama and Kates both took a step back. Momonga and Matsuda dropped their jaws at his words. This was not the usual Issei they knew. Although Issei wouldn't directly ask for a peek at the girl's panties on most occasions, he had not joined Momonga and Matsuda for anything perverted in a few days. There was an awkwardness hanging in the air, and it was blanketing them. The girls did not know what to ask of him next, but something about this man seemed different, somehow almost like something unpleasant was no longer there, replaced by something else, something better. They cannot tell, so a new curiosity burned inside them. There was an enigmatic allure they could not explain as well. You are working quite strong. Did something come up? Kates asked, glancing at the notebook in his right arm. Just, something came up. I got a lot of catching up to do, honestly. Issei awkwardly chuckled, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. What are you studying, anyway? Miriama tilted to peek at the textbook under his armpit. Just math. Issei looked away, trying not to show his embarrassment. I'm quite behind, honestly. I can see that, Miriama smirked. You're not very bright. Ugh, please, don't remind me. Issei hung his head with shame, sagging overdramatically. The two girls giggled. Since when did Issei have a good sense of humor? Are you having trouble with today's lessons? Kates asked, curiously peeking at his textbook as well. No, well, somewhat. I need to get some learning materials on the way home, though. I want to see if I can get a study guide online. The girls stared at him with genuine surprise. Issei has grown more mature and, they don't know, likable? There was a presence around him that made him easier to communicate. Eh? Are you serious? Matsuda just bought the new edition of Kamen Rider Pinky. Don't you want to come with us and watch? Momonga cut himself in with Matsuda, eyes sparkling with anticipation as they looked at the confused Issei. Nah, I got other things to do. Maybe next time. Issei shot them down faster than the speed of sound without an iota of hesitation. Who are you, and what have you done with Issei? They shouted, accusingly pointing their fingers at his face. You would never turn down rewatching all of the new seasons with us, Matsuda shouted, tears running down behind his glasses. What has happened to you? Have you lost sight of the glory of Rider Pink? Maruyama followed up with tears in his eyes as well. Issei looked perturbed by their reaction as he watched his friends drop to their knees, bawling their eyes out loudly enough for others to hear. The other students spectated the two bawling perverts with some interests. I'll just leave while you two are at it. Issei awkwardly smiled as he left the room, not wanting to endure more of their idiotic antics. Maruyama and Kades looked at Issei as he left the room, walking out the door without stopping as he left his perverted friends behind, not even looking back at the two. There is something different about Issei today. Do you feel it, too? Kades asked. I can feel it, but I don't know. Maruyama could not explain it. Like there was sudden gravitation around him that they couldn't ignore, a magnetic pull that shows once they bathed in it long enough. In any case, for some reason, they liked that they no longer needed to worry about Issei anymore. They turned to the bawling idiots, grimacing once they saw snot dripping from their nostrils. Maruyama took 2 steps back, pulling Kades with her. As for Momonga outside, posing as Issei, he sighed in relief. He managed to fool them for now, but he wasn't sure how long he could keep this up. Their suspicion was starting to ripen, taking fruit. He had a plan to solve that dilemma. However, it was too late to use that card. For now, he must unravel Issei's murder, the ghosts haunting the back of his shadow. His main quest had just begun. He returned home at last, with more books in his hands. Momonga did not enjoy that encounter. The others were starting to catch on. If he used that card, he might be able to mitigate the damage enough to integrate himself in Issei's life. Ha! I feel like a body snatcher, Momonga muttered as he closed the door behind him. Issei, welcome home, Issei's mother called. I'm back, Mom. Momonga still cringed whenever he called the woman his mother. He felt so guilty, pretending to be her son, but it wasn't his fault. He prayed that if God existed, he would forgive him. I prepared a sandwich in the fridge if you need it, she cheerfully informed. All right. The mention of the sandwich made Momonga remember his mother. She was a very hard-working woman, someone Momonga wished was still there. He sighed as he headed upstairs and into his room, dropping his backpack and his books down on the desk. Despite suffering no physical exhaustion due to his undead nature, Momonga felt tired, mentally drained from today's classes. The amount of effort he had to pour into his attention span and processing power was staggering in his standards. It was reminding him of his school days, doing odd jobs while still in school. Only this time he had limitless stamina and the luxury to stay awake as long as he willed it. It would have been better if he was reincarnated as Hyodo Issei instead of hijacking his life after he died. At least he thought that Issei died when he seized the reins. The odds of an average teenager surviving such BLD loss was lower than 1% as far as he knew. His mind drifted to his weekend after receiving that suspicious summoning scroll. Momonga had to accelerate his efforts ever since he learned that devils were after him. Momonga had learned some significant changes to his powers after experimenting with his world. 1. He had no level cap. He even gained a level in fighter when he practiced with weapons he had in his inventory. 2. His creation spells were permanent. No need to waste his mana to sustain the existence of his weapons. As for 3, Momonga needed to double-check his experiment. It was a side project he made to store his guinea pigs as well as creating a base of his operations, one that produced outstanding results beyond his expectations. After changing his clothes, Momonga headed downstairs from his room, descending further into the basement. The number of species that could endanger his safety was enough for him to consider pure angels added to the equation as well. He needed a secret base for his operations, an emergency sanctuary should anything endanger his life. Once he entered the basement, ignoring the flashing dim light and miscellanea, he walked upon a flat wall of white plaster and phased through the wall. After all, the wall was an illusion to hide the secret dungeon Momonga made with his wish upon a star spell. An expansive world hidden he carved from a slice of Yggdrasil magic. In short, beneath the Hyodo household laid a network of tunnels Momonga managed to dig out with magic. On Saturday afternoon, in the outskirts of the city, Momonga tested his wish upon a star to alter the weather, slightly removing some clouds for the blue ceiling to shine brighter, more unobscured. Momonga performed the magic in the mountains to test whether any supernatural beings around could detect his super-tier magic and come to his area while he was under perfect illusion. Not a single person arrived at the scene in the open streets after a few hours. Momonga even stationed an eyeball corpse in the area to watch out for arrivals. None had arrived despite the hours, but Momonga still cast counter-detection and other layers of protection upon himself when he made the dungeon just in case. He managed to confirm that neither the devils or fallen angels could detect super-tier spells, which was baffling. At least he knew that they wouldn't notice him using that spell at least. Normally, Wish Upon a Star was a spell Momonga would only use as a very last resort since it cost him exp. However, there was a peculiarity he found upon entering this world. His mana instead of exp fueled the spell. All of his exp fueled skills were replaced by MP, meaning he no longer had the risk of using his exp for his create greater undead and such. However, the cost was still expensive. Creating his dungeon drained nearly all of his MP, leaving him vulnerable for the meanwhile, and that was from wishing up a secret underground dungeon. Momonga looked inside, retaking the result of his wish. Walls of unknown metals colored the ceiling and floor, the hall square in structure and its surfaces flat like paper. Torchlights of arcane blue illuminated the darkness from the walls and ceiling, allowing the residents to see the underground with the light of day. And that didn't account for the rooms the maze interconnected. Deeper inside, Momonga walked, hands behind his back, his face hardened by cold agenda. The illuminated halls shone the presence of dwellers within. Bone and rotten flesh reflected the light pale and rotten gray, figures of undeath roaming within. Momonga lined the halls with his summons, death knights, soul eaters and more, from lesser to greater undead conjured by skills and spells to fill the empty space. After all, what's a secret base with no protection? As for the undead, Momonga found that they wouldn't vanish like usual for some reason. His undead summons were permanent without any costs. Why or how he did not know, which brought much concern to the hardcore player. Even so, Momonga took his time summoning his undead, 8 greater undead, 20 mid-tier undead, and 40 lesser undead, plus others conjured through spells. His entourage included even an Overlord Chronos and general contingencies in case of powerful reinforcement. Momonga mused what he should do if his parents managed to find this place. Maybe he could cast anti-life cocoon at the entrance so he could prevent them from stumbling inside the fantastical realm he carved out. Oh, right, I should soundproof the entrance, Momonga remembered. He did not want the echoes of the screams to attract their curiosities. The parents should not witness the suffering he would inflict upon the unfortunate souls he might encounter. He needed to test his abilities, after all. Shaking himself free from distractions, Momonga delved deeper inside his base, a sharp turn to the right and left, stopping by a door of adamantine. Pulling it open, Momonga entered, seeing a circular table and chairs made of fine Yggdrasil metals glittering lustrous colors under the arcane light of the spacious square room. In this room, he decided to be his strategist room, where he would write his plans and notes for his quests to keep himself in check. There was a room he had reserved for torturing the prisoners, though Wish Upon a Star didn't spawn an operating table. It just gave him a dungeon with some furniture, after all, but it did leave him much open space for liberal use. It reminded him of his time in Yggdrasil, refurbishing the newly conquered Nazarick with his friends, his guildmates of Aints Ul Gown. Momonga looked up the ceiling with nostalgia, longing for those days again. I wonder if they were also reincarnated, Momonga muttered, wondering if they suffered the same fate as him. If he suffered the fate of reincarnation, then wouldn't others would as well? However, Momonga did not spot any evidence of other players, and the world was still modern. He would cross that bridge once he established his foothold in this world, fully prepared to take on all the hurdles this world could throw at him. Seated in his chair, Momonga muddled through his inventory, the same inventory space he had for storing items in Yggdrasil. Slipping his hand in the void, a dark pocket space, Momonga pulled out a paper holding the map of the QO and laid on the table. He printed this map yesterday in a public library, finding it more accessible to obtain than purchasing one from a store. Next, Momonga took out more than 10 scrolls and laid it beside the paper map one by one. Without any class levels invested in the divination branch, Momonga must use scrolls to compensate for his lackings. His reserves were minimal, but considering the possibilities of this world, Momonga had a feeling he could replenish them in no time. His hand disappeared in the mouth of his inventory as he took out his scrolls, piling them on the table one by one. Momonga had the spells in his inventory, but he wanted to test the scrolls. Once the amount was sufficient, Momonga picked up one of the scrolls and tossed it in the air as it unfolded, burning up in arcane blue. False cover. The room glowed, a palpable shroud enveloping his form. Taking another scroll, he repeated the process. Counter detection. Momonga repeated this process, layering protections and countermeasures one by one until he was fully prepared. He was using a primary method to PK other players back in Yggdrasil, gathering as much information on the opposition as possible and swiftly decide the matter with an ambush. It was one of the lessons Panito Mo wrote in his book, Peeking for Dummies. Taking out one last scroll, Momonga cast Locate Item, hoping to find Rainier's feather, or the highest congregation of her feathers on her wings, preferably. Luckily, if there was more than one copy of the item Momonga was locating, the spell would converge on the highest number of them first. Momonga looked at the map, seeing that the most significant congregation was somewhere in Kuo. He wasn't familiar with that area, so he took out 2 more scrolls, Clairvoyance and Crystal Mirror, burning those scrolls so he could receive a better vista of the location. An ovular screen appeared, the rims of its contours like strobing shimmers of golden light, holding the live recording of the bucolic building in question. The location was like a basilica, a church building of sorts, fitting for the theme of a fallen angel. Momonga could sense the presence of the woman inside as the image flickered. Another scene swapped. Inside the room, in the vestibule, a large cross sat on the nave. Beside the cross, Momonga could see the fallen angel he saw on the day 1, the brunette clad in scanty black called Rainier. The woman was speaking with 2 others. One was a tall and buxom woman with brown eyes and long, navy blue hair that obscured her right eye. Her attire consisted of a maroon trench coat-like top with a wide collar, a matching miniskirt, and black-heeled shoes. The trench coat top was open at her chest, giving a view to her chest and cleavage. She also wore a gold necklace around her neck. She appears to wear a white shirt underneath her top, but it can only be seen from the bottom. The other was a girl with blonde hair styled into twin tails and blue eyes. She wore a Gothic Lolita attire, which consisted of a black Lolita dress with white frills, a large black bow on the front, and a green jewel embedded in the collar, white thigh-high socks, and black shoes. She also wore a large black bow on top of her hair. Their mouths move in a conversation behind the screen. The concern on their faces was evident to any observer. Momonga could not hear through their voices or decipher the words from their lip patterns, but what he received was enough. Zooming out, the screen left the building to inspect the surrounding areas. Momonga quirked a brow when he saw some robed clergymen stalking the outdoor perimeter. There also seemed to be some warped space surrounding the area. A defensive warding barrier, perhaps? So the women had a cult backing them. Momonga wondered where'd they come from. They looked like priests, though. He was sure that they were wearing silver crosses of the biblical Chris, the kind he would see on good aligned human NPCs in Yggdrasil. Their robes were black, some of them were smoking in idle chatter, and there were even stray ones playing with their guns, one of them rotating his around the trigger in which his thumb twirled. Who the heck were these guys? Momonga had so many questions right now. Momonga wished to take care of them before he executed his fail-safe plan to integrate him into Issei's life as a new person. Then he would deal with the devils after them. His attack force was small but sufficient enough to prevent the opposition from fleeing while overwhelming them into SBMSN. As for the female fallen angels, he had many questions in store for them. The question was if they were willing to answer them without forcing him to use lethal force. How could strays survive in the world where angels, devils, and fallen angels reign? Ones who fell out of favor with either of the 3 biblical factions. For example, followers of the church exiled from by the theurgic decree of the celestials above. They took shelter among fellow exiles, those cast out long before them, under the fallen angels. They developed an unwritten hierarchy, them being below the fallen angels that took them in. The priests following Rainier were heretics, those committing crimes while hiding behind the name of God, not for it. Outcasts whose names were forgotten, serving the whims of a trio of fallen without question. In short, they were nothing more but the grunts of grunts, the lowest mercenaries of the bunch. As night came, the fallen angels irked their bounded field, a technique designed to repel the humans to preserve their anonymity. After all, humans were a resource to all of the three biblical factions, like cattle, to be bred and harvested. The barrier could also repel other supernatural beings, but it was fragile if the others exerted enough mystical might onto it. The membrane was breachable, easily infiltrated, as anything stronger would attract much unwanted attention as well. The night shone after twilight, darkness drowning the vestigial sunlight of dusk under the horizon of the land, and gradual glimmers of the stars flooding the dark sky. The air was silent minus the idle chatter of the exiled priests as they stood on guard outside Rainier's chapel. It's quiet as usual today. A bored man in robes, back against the wall, spoke to quiet the constant chirping of crickets. Are you trying to incur Satan's wrath on us? It's better this way. An older man informed, leaning on the bricked wall beside the bored man. The bored man didn't answer. Routine in action was more favorable than anything for men like them, even though it was grinding to the nerves. Man, I want to go to town and hit some girls, if you know what I mean. The bored man mused his thoughts aloud. Shooting devil girls in the head, you mean? The older man joked. Oh yeah. The bored man flashed a grin, emanating a twisted lust rarely found in men. I'm up for killing devils too. Too bad that BSTRD Freed got the devil hunting job while the rest of us got the grunt work. I could go for a refreshing change of scenery. Another priest joined the conversation, standing beside the two while rubbing the silver cross in his hands. The way he rubbed the cross was aversive, almost as if he was molesting the symbol of Chris with a pervasive grin on his face. Oh, how they scream before we kill them. Think Rainier would call me to her bed if I present her the head of a noble clansman? The formerly bored man asked. Well, maybe if it was one of the Gremories, then the three cackled together, their twisted mindsets resounding in harmony in the silent night. As they talked their way through time, a different voice joined the conversation. I didn't know that priests can be this bad. Seriously, the church needs to upgrade its standards, though at least I got an idea of what you people are. A new voice called out in the night, startling the priests into action as they drew their respective blades and pistols from their sheaths and holsters. Bladeless hilts of silver igniting swords of pure light and the barrels hammered. The priests outside shot all of their attention towards the direction of the source walking towards them down the cobbled road, seeing. What? One of them uttered. It was a kid. The intruder was nothing more than a kid in casual wear, hands in his pockets, and amber eyes wandering around the setting. His brown hair swayed with each turn of his head, his motion filled with curiosity until his gaze returned to the corrupted priests as they surrounded him from all sides. Hey, think he's a devil? One of them asked. No, I don't feel anything from him. None of the disgusting devil vibe, know what I'm saying? What should we do with him? We can't kill him carelessly. We don't even know his name yet. How are we going to erase the memories of his family if we don't have anything to work with? They muttered in confusion one by one as the kid scoffed. And to think I wasted my time considering any of you. How castigating. The kid shook his head, and his disappointment was palpable. How'd you break through the barrier, kid? If you tell us, we'll make sure it'll be fast. The teenager raised a brow at his statement. Oh, it's quite easy. But what makes you think I'm going to tell you? Their answer as them aiming their guns at the kid, pistols primed and ready to fire on the pull of their triggers. Because there's many of us and one of you, and we have you at gunpoint. The no longer bored man pointed out the obvious. The boy did not seem scared by their weapons. The way he looked at them without batting an eyelid unnerved some of them. He was at gunpoint by many priests, each trained to kill devils and armed to the teeth. Yet he was unfazed. One of the priests saw the boy's eyes flickered up, looking at something above their heads for a while. And I was hoping to find someone worth my efforts. No matter, I believe this is the point where I say, I beg to differ. The boy snapped his fingers, cracking the air with the sharp sound. The fallen priests quirked a brow at this for a moment, confusion filling them, until the space behind the teenager yawned open, revealing a cavernous mouth, a sight that bled their confusions and leaving them empty with bafflement tinged with fear-worming. There was an inexplicable air of dread infecting the atmosphere as if a dark presence was trying to claw its way here from the abyss. Then it came, the first one emerged. A towering hulk in blackened steel, ruined by corrupting decay with crimson bloodlines engraved. holding a towering pavis in one hand and a wicked flamberge in the other. Furthermore, sharp thorns protruded everywhere, painting the figure as an incarnation of violence. Its helmet aimed forth two demonic horns with a face being visible underneath. The face had no skin, rotting flesh over the empty eye sockets in which hate and killing intent emanated like a furnace, glowing with a flashing red light. Worse, it came with a steed, a skeletal horse that which its chest was shining in a radiant aura, beasts of bones with tendrils of sparkling fog, pus yellow and emerald green, replacing BLD and flesh. Then came 5 more. No, 9 more, 10 skeletal riders in total joining the first. Moreover, more unliving horrors emerged from the dark yawning maw behind the teenager, formless horrors of multiple variants mixing into a collage of abominations, a horde of undead staring at the outcasts of the church. Baffled silence choked the priests, confusion and fear swelled in a chaotic swirl, until one of the priests slowly spoke out, calling out to the others to break the silent hold. "Oh oi," one of the priests spoke up, "what the hell am I seeing?" The situation was surreal. A teenage boy that appeared out of nowhere was somehow leading a small horde of undead. The kid looked civilian for Chris' sake, no robes or any presence of magic power within him, but there was an unnatural air around him. "Am I dreaming this?" another one asked, the now scared man feeling his fingers tremble around the trigger. "Believe whatever you wish, it won't matter," the boy answered, his voice dropped in temperature, down to a callous cold. "What the FCK are you?" the eldest of the bunch cursed, staring at the horde with a mix of bewilderment. How could a teenager dabble in the dark arts? Where did he get the power to raise and control the dead? Necromancy was an unpopular art since it dabbled in forbidden practices involving life and death. Any information on the dark arts was much rarer than encountering a sacred gear user, as the art fell out of practice during the years. The church did perform exorcisms against evil spirits and the like, but the priests have never encountered such numbers of undead. Each of the priests took a step back. What was worse, they could tell by the ominous aura of the undead that the unholy beings were dangerous. Their very souls quivered when they gazed into the eyes of the undead riders, but that paled in comparison to the few fleshless hidden amongst the horde. "But now that I've confirmed your stance against even civilians, I'm afraid you've forfeited your last lifeline." The brown-haired teenager raised a hand, palm facing the priests, and flicked it in their direction. "Take them. Make sure none escape this night." The armored riders screamed a monstrous roar in the night, followed by the ghastly groans and wails of the roused corpses. Screeches joined in the chorus, as well as the sounds of clacking bones and meaty thuds of wet flesh from the horde as they marched towards them. The rising moon watched, watching the sinful cry out in misery as the darkness swallowed them. Flashes of holy light flickered from the barrels of their guns, gunshots cracking the silent night, followed by the wet sound of blades cutting through them. The priests proved just as lacking as their HP suggested. He watched the skeleton warriors and archers drag the bodies into the gate one by one, transporting them to the dungeons where the rest of the undead would keep them secure. Momonga shook his head still. To think that they couldn't fare against even the skeleton warriors. The priests were all low levels as he had expected, but still, a great disappointment. One of the skeletons walked up to Momonga, handing him one of their silver laser swords and a pistol. Taking them, Momonga appraised them with all appraisal magic item, scanning their history as the information flowed into his mind. Weapons of the church? Anti-devil weapons with the holy element? Momonga was amazed. He had seen similar items back in Yggdrasil, but these were new. They were involved in construction as Momonga pressed the button on the hilt, igniting the shining blade under his eyes. Out of curiosity, Momonga held the blade in a reverse grip and tried to cut himself. Once the tip of the sword reached his skin, he felt nary a burn, even when he pressed the blade into him with enough strength to puncture his skin. The levels of the items were weak, but he would keep them as souvenirs, for further study at least. At least I now know that the church has a bigger role in this than I thought. Momonga should have expected it, but considering religion as a whole, and he was still surprised by their involvement. How big was the church, and how much influence do they even hold? He at least had some prisoners to question once he finished his task here. Speaking of his task, Momonga turned off the sword, storing the hilt and gun into his inventory, before directing his eyes to the chapel. He had a score to settle with the exiled angels. His undead cleaned the bodies, dragging them back to his underground base, while his Death Knight riders and overlords stood guard outside the chapel. He casually walked forth as all compassion bled from his heart, leaving only cold spite and hardened apathy towards the lives of others as he turned on his emotion suppression. He had his wand of resurrection ready to revive them should they dare resort to suicide. Or he could threaten them with a soul eater or death knight should he manage to injure them enough. Under the caressing moonlight, Momonga walked towards the door of the abandoned church as a small retinue of skeletons accompanied him into the building. 5 skeleton warriors went ahead, entering the building first to lure the 3 women into false ease. After they entered the ruined church, bones and a pair of shoes clattering and pressing the aged stone, Momonga sent them forth towards the room where Issei's murderer resided. Using one of them as his eyes via undead SLV sight, Momonga halted his tracks once they entered the room. Standing on the dais was an altar where 3 females bearing wings of black convened. One of them was Momonga's target, the woman known as Rainier. He paused, waiting behind the door as he sent his skeletons into the fray. Momonga hummed in thought, wondering how he should test their levels. They seem adept at hiding from human society, so they might have anti-information defenses like his, but considering the incident with the male fallen angel, it might not be the case. Still, he had more than one way to test their levels, with contingency plans even for a level 100 foe. Opening the door, Momonga used one of his remaining charges to summon another Death Knight into the material world, behind the door and into the building, as black mist wisped from his human form. From the smog, black tar spewed forth, trickling into a tangible form that resulted in a monstrous hulk wrought from the essence of violence. He sent them forth into the room, slowly following behind them hereafter, ready to retrieve a debt long overdue. Rainier's attire was the usual. Her clothes were black, strap-like objects resembling LTHR around and under her chest, a thong-like piece held around her hips by 3 thin straps, gloves that ran right up her arms with small lengths of chains hanging from them, shoulder guard-like objects on her shoulders with 3 large spikes sprouting from her right shoulder, and black thigh-high heel boots wearing her legs. Worry plastered her face. One of their own disappeared due to unknown causes, vanishing without a trace. Did the devils take him down? No, Rainier dismissed that thought. Rainier was still under the effects of the treaty between the 3 biblical factions, so they could not attack Donaseek without sufficient justification, which Donaseek would never provide. Rainier sent Miltelt to search for him, but she returned with no result. Should they consider moving their base? How could you still not find him, you dumb midget? Calawarner glared with stoic criticism at the gothic Lolita. Hey, don't look at me that way. How the heck can I find him? Donaseek just disappeared, and I don't have anything to work with. Miltelt pouted at her cohort, ticked by Calawarner's piercing words. Enough. Rainier, with a wave of her hand, silenced the 2 below her as she reminisced. If we've lost contact this long, then he is dead. We might need to move our location before Lord Azazel took notice of our... She halted her speech as all 3 fallen angels sensed the presence of tainted unlife trespassing their sanctuary. They stopped as screams erupted around the chapel, church guns banging their barrels, and unholy roars chorusing until a dreadful silence consumed them all. The dissonant quiet brought unease in the fallen angels as they readied themselves for the intruders to breach their chapel. Entering the chapel was a group of skeletons armed with swords and adorned with scraps of LTHR around their bones. However, one undead stood out from the rest, one they have never encountered before and, unlike the rest, inspired fear and caution. It was a hulking mass torn from the essence of violence and hunger for the death of all life. They instinctively shivered upon feeling its baleful gaze. An unexpected face calmly introduced itself, walking up from the night of death, at the most unexpected of times. Rainier looked at him as memories rewound to their false date in remembrance, her jaw slack upon seeing a ghost long thought dead. Hyodo, Rainier uttered. Why was he still alive? He should be rotting beneath the soil by now. How did he survive his wounds? Hyodo Issei had his hands in his pockets, his gaze being empty with apathy as the moonlight reflected dull brown off his hair. I'm afraid that this is our first meeting, as while I do know your name, your history is another story. The same does not go for those companions of yours. They're new to me entirely. Hyodo spoke, his voice resounding an unexpected tone of regality. His words carried a certain charisma Rainier could not describe. No, the way he spoke wrung many questions. There wasn't a trace of the perverted idiocy in his throat. Who, for a moment there, Rainier did not recognize the young man before them. Why, how'd you find us? Midel demanded as she took to the air and conjured her pink spear, pointing it at Hyodo. I always knew. There was something in his voice, something that compelled her snarl and almost flinched at his remark. His voice was unnaturally calm and nonchalant, the palpable dismissal that could only be visible from those looking down on others like ants. Something was wrong, a missing puzzle of the enigma that Rainier could not put her finger upon, something that made this whole picture seem almost surreal. She didn't like it. A light spear manifested in her right hand, formed out of a bizarre sense of anger at the confusion that the pest was causing Rainier with his echoing detachment. Rainier couldn't sense a speck of power from him, so he was mostly an aforethought memory compared to the much more threatening visage of the monstrous figure of the shambling undead giant. Which begged the question, how did he control the undead around him? Where did you find a necromancer? Calawarner demanded as she conjured her double-bladed spear as well. Find? Issei tilted his head. His eyes did not trail to any of their prominent features, be it their chest or buxom thighs. Rainier now understood why she found him unsettling. He was like a different person, a complete contrast to the person she killed. Oh, you mean them? You are sorely mistaken, MDM. I didn't purchase them, I created them. Rainier and the other three angels looked at Issei in shock. The wielder of the unknown sacred gear, coupled with the power of a filthy necromancer, defied all their expectations. The boy had no history with black magic, they were sure of it. However, before any could utter a word, the light of the world died at that moment, all of which the man consumed like a black hole in human form. I believe you owe me a little chat. Issei gave his ultimatum, but before he could finish, each of the girls dropped down onto their knees, middle falling from the sky as tears already trickled down their own fear-stricken eyes. Eh? Momonga blinked upon seeing them crying now like actual girls. The little blonde in gothic Lolita started bawling first while her hands rubbed her eyes. The mature one with blue hair started sniffling and, did she urinate? Momonga could smell the bitter stench of urine and, squinting strong enough, see liquid dribbling down her skirt. He didn't think he would see a mature beauty with an attractive, buxom figure leak herself from excess fear. As for the scantily clad brunette in BSDM-like attire, if Momonga didn't suppress his emotions, he would have felt the temptation. That girl was pretty, on which her attire highly complemented her bodily assets. The contrast that it had with the terror her face displayed made it strong not to flinch. His mental portrayal of them cracked like a bullet through the glass. After the fedora man in the trench coat outright declared his intent on killing him died, well, Momonga honestly expected more. He thought the women were his bosses or something. He thought they were of higher level, but again, his expectations fell short. Are they so affected by it? He deployed his despair aura eye in anticipation of facing potential opposition, ensured that it had a rather good chance of inflicting fear and lowering their stats from the level disparity alone. But, it turned out, they were as weak as that fedora guy. Momonga knew that he was stronger than before, with the new chain of dragon racial levels coupled with his already impressive 100. The skills that came with it were a bizarre bonus, but he still wasn't sure where any of this came from, especially the World Savior gauntlet hidden in his left arm. Now that he recalled, there was that one passive skill in his menu that buffed all aura-type skills. Was it because of this? No, each of their HP bars ranged from levels 11 to 13, so their powers shouldn't surpass the implications of their fragility unless they all had super fragile glass cannon builds. He took a step forth. Wah! All three of the girls scuttled back until their backs hit the stone wall. Momonga felt as if his expectations were wasted, all in vain. He wondered if he could demand a refund from God if given a chance. Do you surrender? Momonga asked as they stared at him in fear. A moment of silence followed after the three flinched at his words. They looked as if the sole sound of his voice drove them deeper and deeper into terror. That would not do. He needed to converse with them, not speak one-sidedly to them. Momonga wasn't sure if they were faking their reactions, but even then, he could not imagine someone, losing control of their bladder to uphold such realism. That and the odds of someone knowing his despair aura I was practically non-existent. With a rather cold-pitted reluctance, he deactivated it and allowed the three to breathe, their bodies visibly sagging down from the lack of oppressing air that formerly choked the life out of them. What? The one he suspected was Rainier rasped out with a tearful sob. What are you? A good question, he wasn't sure himself. Momonga wouldn't mind others calling him a freak or abomination at this point. I am Issei, the boy that you left to die in that park with a hole in his stomach. A straightforward white lie, but it was 4/5 the truth, technically. The first thing I saw upon awakening was you flapping your wings away into the sunset. Logic is an interesting MSTRS, it did provide me with the proverbial breadcrumbs to follow. If he didn't know better than that, he would have thought that Death Knight somehow acquired a sense of dramatic timing as it released a low guttural groan. Yip, the small blonde. Something pushed herself into the tallest one's side with wide eyes as she stared at the undead with her body still trembling. And after collecting them, I can safely conclude that the one responsible for my hideous debacle was you. Momonga finished with the same tone, seemingly ignoring the act of his creation. Your compatriot, on the other hand, was a curious case. I'm sure he had an important role in your plans when he confronted me, but his capacity for speech was too excessive for my taste, so I decided to cut down his boasts in half right before he perished like putting down a barking dog with a sword. Donasik, the blue-haired one muttered. Dona, that's his name? Momonga wasn't one for being judgmental, but no matter how he looked at it, that name was weird, straightforward to forget. He couldn't even pronounce it right the first time without twisting his tongue. He had already forgotten his name the next second. Moving on. So, that was his name? Momonga put on musing expression, trying to look like he didn't forget the man's name. I believe you're all aware at this point that, while I seem to gain much, I lost so much more in exchange, things that cannot be replaced, but recovered. As you're all aware, memories are what constitute us, what defines us, and therefore shape us into who we are at any moment of our lives hitherto. Happy or sad, good or bad, the ones that you cherish or the ones that you would want to bury deep and forget but will never manage to. It's a very curious condition when you have nothing, a tapestry washed into blank white, but you cannot help but feel that there was something on it, something very crucial. Momonga gave a hollow smile to the trio, his words building up the tension in the basement like a pot that was about to reach its boiling point. He wasn't one for monologue, but this wasn't a negotiation, it was a show of force, verbal and tangible. You have something that is long overdue. You took away the identity of the man I was after that little prank in the park. So, I would like to know if you would be so kind as to share just who or what was Issei? I don't know myself, isn't it interesting? What would he do in a situation like this? Would he kill all three of you to make himself feel better? Would he let you live? Would he forgive you or DMN you? We will never know, as I am Issei, and I don't know. It's rather paradoxical, isn't it? This was Momonga's card he was planning to use on Issei's parents on the first day, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The amnesia card. Momonga wanted to use this card against his classmates as well, but it seemed that his hesitation cost him a critical opportunity. Momonga wasn't sure if he could convince the others that he had amnesia in the first place. Momonga scanned the girls for any reaction. The blue one stole swift glances at the brunette from time to time, while the Lolita stared at her openly. The brunette in question was kicking herself back while still trapped on her bottom rear. Well, would you care to relieve me of my questions? Or, Momonga slowly raised his hand with a dramatic effect, posing as if he can reach out and pluck their souls out. Well, their hearts out. Momonga couldn't pluck souls. I can start asking myself one of those questions, and it will be interesting to find the answer for myself. The source may be a bit crude, but, as you can see, I have 3 tries to get it right. He raised his hand, reaching out for them threateningly as if he could pluck out their lives one by one. Momonga could kill one of them with death and see their reactions, but he did not want to waste potential specimens. He was curious about how his spells could affect a native heteromorph in detail. Maybe I'm laying it a bit thick. He could almost hear their hearts stopping as the tension in their bodies seemed to reach the level of granite statues. Sure, he wanted to make them talk, under the impression that he was facing remorseless killers. Was he wrong? He expected them to be firm, to resist his efforts to the point at which he would resort more substantial methods like despair or a Roman 2 and above, combined with his other skills if he must. During his silent musing, Momonga felt one of his skeletons being attacked. A familiar blade of light seemingly cutting down one of the skeletons at the back, knocking it down with a large chunk of its HP missing. "Yayaha!" came a battle cry. Turning around to face the entrance, Momonga raised his arm to stop his undead retinue from attacking the newcomer and commanded them to step aside. They revealed a man with silver hair in the opening, strange eyes that seemed to shift between several shades of red and a white suit under his bluish trench coat. He was moving with speed far above those of the priests his undead defeated in this broken world. His moves were almost erratic, but the demented smile and wide-eyed gaze kind of made it strong to tell if he was even trying or just waving that thing around. Where the hell did he come from? Momonga's undead, especially his eyeball corpses, didn't pick this guy up. Was he hiding somewhere in this chapel under his undead's nose? And who might you be? Momonga decided to try and once more use despair aura eye, but was interrupted. Ha! Suddenly the man poised the silver, church-themed gun in his hand at Momonga and shot a round of light. "The name is Fried Selzen, you little necro beach, but thanks for all these toys. Here, I've got a present for ya." Momonga felt a tap on his forehead as a literal bullet made out of light hit him square on the line between his eyes slightly above his brows. The man's move was decent, aiming for the summoner first instead of the constructs. Knowing the level of the pistol, Momonga allowed the bullet to hit him, feeling a tap on his forehead squarely. The impact barely tickled his skin as it vanished like a stray thought leaving his memory. The priest that named himself Fried Selzen landed on the floor, looking at Momonga baffled. Huh? The lunatic priest blinked, confused. So he expected the bullet to puncture another breathing hole in his head, understandable. "What? Why isn't your head drooling BLD?" he asked as he looked at the steaming hole of his gun for a moment. An air of awkwardness descended in the scene as Momonga extended his hand at Fried. Time to make an example. Grasp heart. Momonga clenched his fist with Issei's hand. The man who named himself Fried Selzen froze. Momonga felt something squelching in his palm, followed by the feeling of warm liquid spilling through his fingers as he unclenched his hand. Afterward, Fried Selzen dropped to the floor face first, his eyes now hollow, empty of life. Momonga hoped that he would survive it a little to confirm the stupor after effect of grasp heart. Shame. Momonga could have used him for his experiments. Maybe he should try reviving this one, and then kill him again after wringing all the information he could offer. Momonga should think of ways to dispose of the bodies afterward. Maybe find a pit somewhere to dig them in or test which spells were optimal for body disposal. Now then, eh? When Momonga turned to the girls, each one of them was looking at him with wide eyes, their faces ashen with more fear than under the effect of despair aura eye. "Well, I see that the brief intermission was very educational to you. Now that I confirmed my capacity to end your lives with a single gesture, such as with the pitiful corpse over there, let us return to our discussion. Ah, yes, the one question that remains, would I need to do the same 2 more times?" By the looks on their faces, he wouldn't. Hopefully, he could obtain quite a bit of information from the 3 angels. Momonga somewhat regretted that he didn't get to play his amnesia card, but maybe another chance could arise. A black void zipped open like a cavernous maw yawning into the world before 4 figures emerged, 3 women of various builds and sizes followed by 1 boy with brown hair and attractive features. So that's how Hyodo Issei died. Momonga found his venture very lucrative as he sat down on the edge of his white sheet-covered bed and digested what he learned. The teen before was an unawakened wielder of a sacred gear, albeit her superior failed to inform her of its name and background. The boy was human, and his background was average, barring his perverted nature. His death was calloused, though, murdered by a fallen angel posing as his girlfriend. It was almost as bad as watching his mother die in front of him. Momonga acquired the verbal description of his sacred gear, a gauntlet that could double his power. A vague definition as Momonga wasn't sure if it meant skills, spells, or stats. He asked about its drawbacks, but they could not name any no matter the number of questions he asked. Theoretically, he could use it as much as he wanted without consequence, but he wouldn't test his luck given his experience with the balancing of Yggdrasil. But that did not explain why I am now a dragon. Well, part dragon, Momonga tapped his chin. He already asked about the possibility of a race change, but they said it was impossible. They had never heard of a sacred gear that demonstrated the ability to become part of the dragon race naturally. The sacred gear didn't have the power to initiate race change as well, no matter the number of scanning attempts to perceive otherwise. However, Momonga took the word naturally into account. There was the possibility of a polymorph, but he doubted there was a spell that could allow such a thing, minus using wish upon a star or shooting star. He envied the one known as Issei much for possessing abilities that rivaled those of world-class items. Not only that, his inventory space had expanded to a ridiculous degree. What the hell? That shouldn't be possible or even allowed. His PvPer soul was crying in agony. Anyways, Momonga at least confirmed the major factions that claimed land in this town: angels, devils, and fallen angels. When he asked about Nephilims, the women claimed that they were sporadic, humans who held the power of the heavens in their hands. Angels that could intermingle with humans were usually fallen angels, as pure angels could not rely on their base longing to reproduce with the humans without falling. The concept of angels being unable to love or have sex was ridiculous. One small drop, and then instant banishment. Whoever their god was, he was just as corrupt as the corporate bosses he worked under before. Just in case, Momonga asked if they were giants. They looked at him confused. In other words, the Nephilims here were nothing like warrior Takemikazuchi or Yamaiko. He asked about their abilities and the races of devils, only to receive further eyes of confusion before asking if he was referring to chimeras or stray devils. He asked about what they meant by chimeras. They responded by saying that they are artificial life forms, usually abominations, created by alchemists and heretical mages. Stray devils, on the other hand, are those that turned into devils but weren't strong enough to withstand the power before they twisted into abominations. Momonga would love to see one for comparison. Maybe he should hunt one or two for dissection. He would need to go hunting for some. He was even more surprised when he heard that some of the students at Kyo Academy were devils. He wondered, should I hunt for one? Momonga's collector spirit was rising. He wasn't sure whether to consider them as people or not, so he would refrain from treating them like mobs for now. As he sat there, the three fallen angels fidgeted, unsure of what will happen to them. You mentioned that you were subordinated to a higher fallen angel? Momonga asked. There was an excellent point, as he wasn't in any position to oppose someone who was even relatively high on any pecking order. If factions overlap with the Yggdrasil variant, guilds, then these three noobs could bring out a far more mature member out to put down his much more massive boot. Momonga wasn't really in any hurry to be the ant in this metaphor, nor any time at all if he could help it. Someone interested in my sacred gear? The name still felt strange, the way he worded it even stranger. After his position in the Hyodo household was established, the first thing he tested was to look into what became of his gear, and other things that he supposed came with him. What he found was strange. Bar the borderline impossible extra levels that flew out of nowhere, and he also gained a freaking world item gauntlet that he had no clue what to do with. Boosted gear wasn't exactly weak. Even if it were more suited for someone who was of a warrior class, he still wouldn't oppose his possessing such a boon, although his concern for losing the chance of obtaining an optimized build still burned. In a dormant state, it didn't do much other than being a separate storage space that he could use to store weapons and then instantly swap them from within in combat at command, or equip an item to the gauntlet, which Momonga could use through his sacred gear. Not very shabby, a bit like those cache items he was accustomed to, albeit limited. Still, he could now at least cut some of the lag if he ever wanted to fight in close-quarter combat. A small secondary part was that it had sort of a hold-on-use effect that allowed him to store items that he could use without having to wear them, but it also held limits. Its second form was what was aptly named Scale Mail, and it was ridiculous. Upon donning the full set of self-repairing gear that covered his whole body from head to toe, he gained a tremendous increase in all of his parameters, defenses, resistances, and pretty much everything that he could think of. The description of the appraisal was strange, and if he understood it correctly, then the whole thing was comprised of an entire dragon, from its flesh to its bones. Momonga had no clue how to accurately interpret it, the fact that it wasn't comprised from parts of a dragon, but the dragon itself was forcefully forged into the gauntlet stuck on his arm. The skills that he gained from all of his dragon levels were working with it and boosted it even further, making him feel a bit cheated. It was in perfect synergy with them, as if the gauntlet in question was specifically made for someone with these specific races and skills. He would need to subtly inquire if the 3 prisoners that were kneeling on the floor before him knew of any sacred gear like that. Seeing them nod in nervous confirmation, Momonga continued with his questions. Is there any case of a sacred gear capable of transforming the race of the wearer? Or others, in general? His tone was more of curiosity than anything else, covering up the honestly unsettling amount of unknowns that made his mind run a mile a minute. Anything akin to something like the devil's items? If I remember right, you called those things evil pieces, a reincarnation in a tiny chess piece. This time, the one he learned as Middelt spoke. Why yes, oh great one. So she's already resorting to bootlicking? Momonga didn't stop her, though, anything to get them to talk, but he needed to tell them to stop it later on. They only pick the ones that catch their interest, though. The blonde Lolita's voice was both fearful and respectful. They include them into their peerages and make them their servants. Not much is known how it is done. Now she had caught his interests as he leaned forward. How do they pick their candidates? For example, would anyone with a great physical build or with flawless academic prowess draw their eyes? Momonga inquired about their selection process. Or do they have the skill to peer in the potential of those around them? This time, it was Rainier who answered. It's not that simple. They can use their magic to detect sacred gears, good lineage, bloodline, capabilities. I cannot say for certain as we never were told specifics. Only that they seek out someone strong to repopulate their faction. They initiate race change to boink them. Momonga would have sweat-dropped if not for his emotion suppression. From a purely logical and extremely cynical standpoint, that solution was a very viable option for any race of low-rate reproduction with high stakes on the table. However, the contract that came with the race change concerned the salaryman inside. He really didn't want to know what precisely the servitude in a peerage meant, as he imagined his previous workplace working him to the bone. So it's like farming for rare specimens amongst sheep. Amusing, but that only airs another question. How does a sacred gear function? Why did it reside in those like I? I do not recall myself being part of a lineage of dragon knights. That was the other question. Why Issei had that dragon gauntlet on his arm? I'm not sure if there is any actual pedigree to my bloodline or if there is one in the first place. How sacred gears choose their wielders were Momonga's most significant concerns. Any information on this would give him the right tools to spot one at first sight. That did not count the reason why the spell registered his gauntlet as a world item and not a sacred gear. Lord Azazel said that yours gave out an output of a dragon, Rainier continued, but almost instantly shrunk upon herself as Momonga's eyes narrowed at the name dropped into the bag. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show any disrespect. We are not sure how that works. We only know that they randomly appear in people, and that there is seemingly no rhyme reason to who they choose. Please don't kill me. I think I made a bit too much of an impression on her. Momonga really wanted to facepalm right now at his eagerness to reap his rewards. Assuming that he could, Momonga noted to find a way to gauge the levels of others other than their HP and MP, along with countermeasures against anything like false data, life and false data, mana. He preferred to not waste his energy barking at shadows in his every step. Not only that, her new mindset both surprised and worried Momonga. He might have to charm them to ensure they sneaked no falsehoods inside the flow of information. Well, at least he gained much from this venture. Tools he had never encountered, and specimens for experimentation. He was sure they could not escape the area as his undead would beat them into SPMSN before they take another step. He could use the angels to aid him against the devils should he encounter hostilities from their side. The girl's description of devils did not leave much room for any positive image, especially regarding their rulers. Well, assuming that the current 4 great Satans held some modicum of decency, although he would instead withhold any encounter with them until he was sure that he could face at least one of them in combat and emerge as the victor. Your answer is acceptable, as I did not find anything noteworthy about my ancestors after my reawakening. Trying to recall what else to scry from them. Momonga recalled learning about their race's abilities, the powers of the angels that didn't fall from grace alongside the surface capabilities of their human followers, and a summary of the devil's strengths and weaknesses, only to recall that he was still hosting prisoners under his belt. Now, onto the most important topic of all. Momonga shifted in his seat, placing one leg over the other and looking down at the quivering brunette. Why did you kill me? What do you have to gain from my death? Rainer, Kawalmer, and Midelt could not recognize the current Issei. This one did not hold the same amount of perversion as the previous Issei. Even during their long lives ever since God BRTH them millennia ago, they have not witnessed such a drastic change of character after an illogical revival from any human in their recorded history or any species at all. This Issei held the air of an avid learner combined with a majestic charisma that could only emanate from kings, true rulers of their kind. A face painted under a different light did bring a new perspective, as Rainer could not find any surviving traits from the previous Issei at all. Is there something wrong? Issei asked, his tone calm and collected, stirring them from their thoughts. Rainer fidgeted. She did not know what to say. Her real reason for killing him off was because, actually, why did she kill him? Now that she thought about it, she did not care for humans at all, so then she paled upon realizing that she did it because she thought it would win Lord Azazel's favor. She did it for power and prestige, and karma was rearing its ugly head at her. Your complexion is paling. Did you recall a trauma from a distant past, or a sin that you now regret? Issei spoke as if he could read her like a book. Rainer furtively glanced at Issei. She swore she saw BLB red lights gleaming behind his pupils. Rainer bit her lower lip. She could not do it. She could not speak the truth and risk her and her companion's demise. Kawalmer and Midelt's pain-filled stares were already enough to break her confidence as they were. Very well. How about this? Should you speak the truth, I promise not to bring you any form of harm in retaliation. Would that be enough? Issei proposed. They threw their heads up at their warden, confused. Rainer could only utter that response. She looked at her partners as they shared the same confusion. Really? Rainer asked, unsure whether he would keep his word or not. She raised her caution, expecting the human to betray them. Indeed. If it assuages your fears, then I will swear it on my name as Hyodo Issei. I am a man that holds my bargains, for a man that betrays himself can never truly live. Who am I speaking to? Rainer shouted in her head. The Issei she knew would never hold promises with a tone of authority like this. It didn't make sense. It was like she didn't know him anymore. His cool voice just exuberated a dignified grace that she could not resist. I did it. Rainer bit her lip. Even if she remained silent, she would die anyway now that she reviewed her situation. There was no escape in the end. I killed you because I thought Lord Azazel would promote me if I did. The three closed her eyes, waiting for the explosion of ire and any form of pain that would follow. However, as they waited, they felt no pain. They could only feel their hearts pnd their chests, drummed by fear and adrenaline. 1 second passed, then a minute followed. Counting the seconds in their heads, they opened their eyes after a few minutes bypassed them. When they looked up at Issei, they did not see anger warping his features or hatred. They only saw confoundment. Excuse me. Allow me to repeat what I heard. Momonga pressed his temple with his finger, gently rubbing his head. You thought that murdering a wielder of a powerful sacred gear would earn you prestige and power. Didn't you consider that you could have recruited me the first time instead? No, wait, did you kill me because you're racist? Momonga uttered the last question because, as ludicrous as it was to the ears, he could not, no matter what, follow her train of logic. Why kill someone that she could easily stuck with barely any effort instead of luring that person into joining her guild? That only made sense if she was racist like the human players of Yggdrasil, to cut the bud before it bloomed. Wait, this makes too much sense. He felt a bizarre sense of irritation mixed with an almost familiar apathy, the same one he felt towards idiots that were giving noobs a bad name. While he was self-aware enough not to call himself a prodigy or anything remotely close, he could see an opening and an opportunity. It was kind of in his job description as a guild leader. Rainer's mouth opened and then closed. There was a moment of silence when her eyes seemed to develop an eerie shadow of despair slowly. Momonga knew she couldn't lie to him, but she couldn't exactly tell the truth out of fear of being smitten on the spot for her idiotic stunt and being a racist. Don't tell me you actually killed me because you're racist? Momonga asked once more, unsure whether to pity her or he couldn't find the word for anything more degrading than pity. That's incredibly stupid and very offensive. You were already aware that the devils, which were nesting nearby for a long time, were fully capable of raising the dead as their servants, but you still decided that killing me was the best option. What if the devils found me after your little stunt? They would have held me in their debt as I looked to them as saviors, a willing SLV fueled by sheer gratitude for my second chance at life. And that's not including the borderline, ret concept of earning promotions for murdering potential recruits. I don't know how much wealth your superior holds, but I assume, with utmost confidence, that this Azazel fellow would have given you his blessing and half a kingdom if you recruited me instead. Furthermore, if he found that my sacred gear is of any value, consider your promotion set in stone, as he would probably shower you with more rewards than you can dream of, assuming he can grant literal wishes. Please tell me you considered this before throwing the first proverbial and literal spear through my heart and stomach. Actually, that would probably be Issei's fate now that he thought about it. Wait, if they could detect sacred gears, then do they know about Issei's? A good question crossed his mind. He recalled the black flyer that was in his pocket before. He threw it away because he thought it was one of the many useless ads. He didn't scan that one, but he was sure that it was the same paper that the cosplay lady handed to him, the devil summoning flyer. Yeah, they definitely knew that Issei had a sacred gear. Back to the subject. I will take your silence as confirmation. Momonga shook his head with great disappointment. No, wait, I'm not racist. Rainier shook her head, trying to change his mind that she was not racist desperately. Momonga shifted his gaze to the others as they stuttered, before joining Rainier in shouting denial. Please, W, we're not with her. I'm not racist. I love humans, I promise. The buxom secretary and blonde Lolitas were spouting absurdities at this point. I suspect that you're now taking advantage of my amnesia. Momonga now considered his options of punishment. While he held some guilt over taking Issei's body as his own, albeit not out of choice, Momonga would not let this offensive stunt slide. Not even he would kill someone in cold BLB for such a superficial reason. They must learn from their mistakes, or else they would repeat their blunders. It's pointless to list your crimes as you were the instigator, with the other two following you as accomplices out of their volition, so that I will split your punishments evenly. It is fair to place the leader on the same line as her followers. I'm not exactly as educated on the supernatural side of the world as I want to be, so that I will require your services from now on. Consider it as repaying every bit of what your stunt cost me day by day, moment by moment. Momonga narrowed his eyes into a glare, unaware that a malevolent emerald halo of corona surrounding a crimson gleam in his pupil dominating the amber irises and black pupil. We agree. Rainier's voice came out more like a squeak than anything else. Her form of response made Momonga pause. He honestly expected them to refuse or to try and bargain for something else. Thinking about them, what other uses they have other than basically being a trio of walking and talking introduction guide into Supernatural for Dummies pamphlets. Oh wait, they could mind wipe witnesses. They also know their way around the basic magic world as well, irked barriers to ward off eyewitnesses and the like. But it wasn't powerful. Still, their abilities were cost-efficient compared to the amount of mana needed to fuel his control amnesia. They were still fragile, so Momonga could use them as scouts at the very least until he found a way to make better use of the idiot trio. Then I won't be convoluted with your duties, even from my minimal idea of how your respective prowess, that which, if measured, I could tell you three weren't even close to being the cream of the CRP. A bait and a shot in the dark, not too obvious, but it would work for him in the long run if he'll ever lose any need for them. We're going to re-examine any piece of information still at your disposal, and that includes any detail that your memories hold, be it relevant or not. I think of myself as an intelligent person, and waltzing into unknown territory only makes the whole venture less profitable. Think of it as a daily quiz about your vision of the world around you. His casual tone then dropped, emotions bled, replaced by cold and an almost incomprehensible pressure. But if you disobey me, then please do not beg for mercy, as I reserve none for those who betray my trust. What will happen should not come as a surprise to any of you. As I have shown before, I have a very particular set of skills, and I will look for you. I will find you, and I will kill you. A small flare of despair aura to puncture the last two words was a nice touch to the speech Momonga just conjured on the spot. A hazy memory of an old movie helping somewhat. Momonga shifted his tone back to a casual one that held almost a nonchalant air to it and way too casual for the current topic. Your contract with your previous employer is hereby terminated. You three are dead, and that will be what everyone should see for the duration until I state otherwise. You are not to be seen, not to be heard, and not to be, in any way or form, to be made known to anyone other than myself or those I deem worthy. He gave them a small smile that allowed the three fallen angels to see his teeth. After all, if the rumors of your death will start to crumble, I would be compelled to force it closer to reality with my own two hands. I hope that you can see how it can end badly for one of you, right? None of the three fallen angels moved. For a moment, he thought that they lost their ability to breathe, and he went a bit too far, but as he relaxed his posture, they collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint. Well, nobody ever said the first time would be the charm. Should he be more forceful? He made sure to converse with them civilly using his salaryman side this time, although he allowed himself to be more casual in his wordings to maintain his teen facade. Issei, dinner is ready, his mother called from outside his room. Oh, SHT. Issei looked at the three unconscious girls and the door of his bedroom. He must hide them before his endgame boss, known as his mother, spotted them and construe a terrible misunderstanding. He did not want to use control amnesia on her. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author I4MD347H and Zaralann on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.